This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough, you can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price that you can get Truefire All Access for. This is not a new piece of gear, but I think it's a piece of gear that has actually gained relevance since it first came out, and is probably more relevant. That's what it means to gain relevance. But I think actually could be more interesting for a bunch of folks. So I've got, you know, friends that are predominantly want to be a tube amp player, or friends that have tried modeling and kind of just didn't get on with it. You know, obviously I see comments from folks like whether they be pros that absolutely hate the modeling thing, or, you know, people online that are kind of sick of the modeling thing. But if you're sick of this digital modeling thing, but you want to be a working musician, guitarist, I think this might be the sort of thing that you should be looking at. And they called it the wrong name. They called it a RevivalDRIVE. Now, I don't think Origin Effects should have called this an overdrive, because it's more than that. So this is actually quite an interesting piece of gear, and I wanted to show you in this context here, which is actually using it for what it was designed for, and less of what it's actually become, but kind of going back to what this was and using this as an amp simulator into an IR. So that's what you're hearing now. Now for me, what I like about the RevivalDRIVE experience is that it is pretty simple. So the way to think about this really is kind of two different amps, and if you're only really using this as a sort of pedal platform type thing, then you could just get the RevivalDRIVE Compact. If you're using it for channel switching, then this would make sense. The hot rod version as well, I guess, makes sense for people that are only going to be playing heavier styles. You know, if I'm using this as a pedal platform type thing, then I'm going to be using the silicon side with the gain down pretty low, because the valve side still has quite a lot of gain, even with it at, like, I got it here at about 10 o'clock. So what I like about it, simple from that point of view, kind of, but actually, you know, when you look at what these knobs do, they have things like a more presence control, or like a blend control, or you know, dip switches for preamp, dip switches for bright cap. So there is a little bit of like, okay, what does that do, what does that do element to it. But once you kind of figure out where the things that you might turn regularly are, and you find a tone, it's actually pretty straightforward to use. You know, like you've got an output, which I just leave pretty much dimed, and then you've got a volume, which is going to be like on a normal amp, your gain, and then you've got lows. That's pretty straightforward. You've got a blend control, so this can blend in your dry signal if you want to. So for instance, if you were using it as a traditional drive pedal, then you could blend in some amount of your normal kind of signal. You've got ghosting control, which, you know, I don't know what that is particularly. I'll flash up now, but potentially it doesn't particularly matter. But I think that's like a thing that happens with a real amp. And, you know, when you look into what Origin actually did with this, this is the Deluxe 55 Tweed recreation, and this actually gives you a much better idea of what this pedal really is. So this is a simplified kind of concept, the Deluxe 55, and they've done a few of these, right? But this is essentially, they called this Tweed recreation. And if you look into some of this stuff, they've actually gone through the effort of creating an analog version of a tube amplifier. So things like sag, and they've got documentation around what is involved. There's even transformers in here and stuff like that. When you feel these are weighty bits of gear, but I think they figured out by the time that the Tweed came along that actually there was a better way to market these than as just like a drive pedal, because there is this definite you know, audience of players that are having to do things like wedding gigs with in-ears or stuff like that, having a silent stage, or they've seen like the going direct kind of workflow, and how, you know, you don't have to worry necessarily about setting up mics and amps and all that sort of stuff, but they don't really connect with like the menu diving and that sort of stuff. I think that's exactly who this could suit. Let's jump into it and kind of mess around with some tones. But what I'm doing here really is just using it into Helix Native, where I'm running an IR that I know I like, essentially. And honestly, I feel like the feel on this thing is incredible. It takes pedals really well as well. In the intro, I tried a Blues Driver, and then I tried a David Barber Exacta Fuzz into the drive side. But I think I want to explore trying this maybe live with an FRFR, because yeah, I think there's definitely, you know, comment if you're watching this video and you're like, yeah, I'm not really one for menus. It's something to me like the Strymon Iridium, but in analog form. And I think there is definitely a more liveliness and something around the way it seems to react to pick and stuff like that. Something a little bit more like the Friedman IRX type stuff, which when I plug into them, versus kind of some of my modelers and stuff, I do feel like there's an extra something going on. Could be placebo, but something that's a little bit more like using my amp through a load box. And that's kind of a nice thing to have, right? If you can have something which feels a little bit more lively. But yeah, check out some of their documentation. It's not a cheap thing, but not terribly expensive compared to some modeling solutions either. And if you feel one, you could definitely throw that through a Tesla window or something like that if that was something you were into. So yeah, kind of, let's just try it a sec. So here I am going into Helix Native. So you see, like, there's a lot of knobs to think about, but that didn't sound like how I wanted to. This one here and this one here again, and you're switching between sides. So I'm over on this side with the silicon rectifier is like my clean. And like a real amp, as you turn it up, then start to get into your clipping territory. But it's not just a drive pedal, do you know what I mean? Like, that is not what we're talking about really here. Similarly, this presence switch, presence, over this way more. And in the middle, like closer. Now we've got a bright cap, US bright cap. Or Marshall. Or off. Now, other things that we got here, preamp, you can have US style. Or Marshall style. So lots and lots of bits and pieces even on just the one channel, but as I was kind of set up for the intro, I was using it more like this, which is just as a clean, which I think is the more underutilized side of, you know, the RevivalDRIVE. I think amp tone, amp recreation is really what we're talking about here. Then similar sort of stuff here. You could have the bright cap, no preamp, US preamp, GB preamp, and then bright cap GB or US. But there is this lovely sort of transparency and like some of that singiness, like tubeness or glassiness. That to me seems to come through in a way that is not always there with some of the modeling stuff, right? You can see the lights actually sag as you play. But yeah, not a drive pedal. Think of this more as an amp recreation thing, and I think this is definitely something. I bought this after I did the demo of the Tweed Deluxe 55, guys. I was like, I need to explore this more, because I think, yeah, certainly for some of you guys that are not wanting to go down the menu route, I think this is a little bit of an under sort of explored area, which is not tube amps, which is not modeling, but is this sort of analog recreation of an amp, which maybe could suit some of you guys. I don't know, let me know in the comments if you've tried any of the Origin Effects sort of amp recreation stuff, what you think they should have called it instead of a drive pedal, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers for stopping by. I really enjoyed the feel and the tone of playing this thing, and it's kind of making me think like that actually makes me want to play it more.